pushing me up to the top. I saw the clouds looking angry, but then the sky reached my mind.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Vaylen. I'm the chairperson and founder of South African Women in Sport Foundation. This is our last webinar for this year, one of our monthly webinars that we decided after the lockdown that we will do, and we'll continue with this program throughout next year. As this being the last one, we thought we should make it more exciting by bringing strong women in the webinar, and you will see them as we introduce them. And two of them were quite involved when we started with our seminars. Actually, by then it was a seminar when we started our conferences. In 2015, we started with our seminars, and we had Carol and Vaylen involved in that seminar. And today, again, we are having them involved again as we close our year on 2020 after all the experience we had this year. So our moderator today is Carol. So Carol, over to you. You will introduce yourself and enjoy the session with the girls.
I most certainly will do that. And Tambi, thank you so much. First of all, I think just for the entire webinar series, it's been so insightful. It's been wonderful as well to see the global sporting community getting involved and really talking about some critical parts of sport around the globe. As you rightfully said, this is the final webinar and we're going out with a bang. We've been focusing on different aspects of sport globally through the different webinars that we've had so far under the auspices of the South African Women in Sport Foundation. So today, really, what we are going to be discussing is women in sports media. And I am so honored to be joined by a very esteemed panel, individuals that are very experienced when it comes to sport broadcasting and being involved in sports media in particular. There's three of them. So the ladies that we're going to be hearing from, part of the panelists, and none other than Ms. Linda Rulashe. We've got Ms. Vaylen Kirtley as well, who's a part of the panel, and Ms. Busisiwe Mokwena. I'm going to be telling you a little bit more about these ladies and their experience. So good to have you with us. We know that all of you are very busy individuals. I know that so many of you, the global sporting community, the sports family, welcome to this live webinar. I know that you loving being a part of it. This is going to be very interactive. It's not just going to be a Q&A session between myself and the panelists. This is going to be a discussion, and we want you to be a part of it. So we've got all the details that are scrolling there at the bottom of your screen in terms of the hashtag, and also how it is that you can send through your comments via YouTube, also via Facebook on the SA Women in Sport Foundation pages. So make sure that you send through your comments and any questions that you might have for any of us. All right, so I want to let the panelists introduce themselves, as it were. Linda, I'm going to start off with you. So great to have you as part of this. So Linda Rulashe has been involved for over 10 years now, working as a communications, public relations, and reputation management practitioner in sports. Linda, tell us a little bit more about your experience and what it is that you do.
Hi, thanks, Carol. Thanks, and afternoon to everybody. So just briefly, my background is in journalism. I started out as a sports writer about 30 years or so ago, and got into sports actually by default, because when I was studying journalism at Rhodes University, I was working on the campus publication, and we were allocating roles of who would take care of different sections of the newspaper, and I ended up with the short stick, if I may put it that way, with sports at the end. And since then, I've basically never looked back. I played a bit of sports at school, tennis and table tennis, softball, but never really excelled, but always had an interest in it. And after Rhodes, I then basically used that as a launch pad into my journalism career into sports. Started out at what was then called the Weekly Mail. And I've worked in some of the top publications in the country, like Sunday Times, City Press, worked my way up until I eventually became editor of the newspaper. And then thereafter, basically branched out into communications, reputation management in the public sector, which is where I am currently now.
Great stuff, Linda. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, there's areas of how it is that you started in the career that I can also identify with. So I've been in the industry as a sports broadcaster, mainly television, but I've also done radio, a script writer, voiceover artist, and I started 20 years ago. And I understand how you would say you sort of got the short end of the stick, as it were, because when I was starting out as well, you know, being a sports broadcaster, and particularly a female sports broadcaster, wasn't seen as the fashionable thing to do. In fact, I always feel as if this industry found me, and this job found me, because I wasn't actively seeking out to be a female sports broadcaster, because I didn't know that that was what was on offer. And when I started working, my first gig was with the South African Broadcasting Corporation, the SABC. I worked for SABC Sports with Sports Buzz, exactly how Vaylen started as well, and she'll tell us more about that. And at that time, there were little to no female sports broadcasters in the industry. I remember there was like the Cynthia Chaka, for example, who was very much involved, Kolelwa Majeke, but they weren't given very prominent roles, and ones where, you know, upcoming young ladies could look up to and say, wow, this is an avenue of sport broadcasting that I can follow. But obviously, with more and more of us now through the years joining the industry and being such an example, we're starting to see more individuals coming into it. And essentially, that's what we're going to do with the conversation today as well, is for all of those aspiring sports journalists, in any who want to be involved in sports, in any part of sports media, as it were, we'll be able to give them a few nuggets and a few ways that they can do that and that they can excel via our experience. Vaylen, let's talk about you. I remember, yes, you started off in sports broadcasting as well on Sports Buzz, and you were still at school during that time. Tell us more. Okay, well, I'm going to need you to unmute. Vaylen? Yes.
Okay, well, there we go. Now you can hear me. Thank you very much.
Hi.
So, Carol, you'll know the journey very well, and you kind of have intimated about it. We followed exactly the same one at the South African Broadcasting Corporation. I still remain there. I've been really privileged to get a host of fantastic opportunities with the SABC, of which I'm very, very grateful for. But it also happened by chance. I went to school with Cynthia Chaka's oldest son, and she was busy doing some work for SABC Education at the time. And I had always been involved in drama and public speaking and the choir. And I think it was actually written in the stars that I was going to be somebody that was on the sidelines talking and encouraging people, because even when I used to go to cross-country meets, and I love cross-country, I love running, and I still do today, I would be that person as we started saying, have a good run, that really irritating person where everybody's out of breath and they're running, you know, the first kilometer, and I'd be saying, yes, go, well done, you know, have a great run. So I was one of the children that Cynthia Chaka had asked to come and be a part. She was busy filming different Bible scenes for SABC Education. And she asked some of her son Kenneth's friends to come to Melville Corpies to learn a couple of scripts and be Mary and Joseph and a couple of the disciples. And she said to me, you know, you learn scripts really well, and have you ever thought about presenting? And I hadn't at all. And then 2 years later, she phoned me and she said, Sports Buzz, which is the junior sports program that Top Sport then became SABC Sport, was producing. And it really was that, and the rest is just history. So I got involved in the junior sports program. And then, as you'll know, Carol, the SABC is this amazing incubator of giving people opportunities. And I think that we have the SABC to thank for a lot of the women that we get to see in sports broadcasting today.
Yeah, agreed. But I think where we all can relate is that, and I'll hear Busisiwe's story as well, is that we've always had an interest in sport. So that was almost the launch pad to getting involved in sports media.
Yeah.
Busi, I'm going to need you to unmute. Tell us about your journey and how you got started in this sporting landscape.
Afternoon to everyone, and thank you, Carol, for having me. You're right. I did have an interest in sport growing up. I played a couple of sports which I wasn't really good at, like Melinda was saying. I was just an average athlete. I took part in basketball, volleyball, a bit of football, and athletics as well. But knowing that I wouldn't be able to make a career out of those sports that I was taking part in, I also had a keen interest in journalism. At the time, I just wanted to be a news journalist, but because I loved sports like so much, I decided, hey, why not do both, or just take the two and merge them and become a sports journalist. So yeah, that's how I fell in love with sports journalism. At the time, I was still in Middelburg, where I grew up, and until I came to Joburg, studied diploma in journalism with Rosebank College, and I got into, after graduating in 2009, South Africa was preparing for the 2010 FIFA World Cup, and the Confederation Cup was coming first. So we applied. I think when I applied, I was still in college the year before, which was 2008. We applied, and I got into the media department of the Confed Cup at the Ellis Park. And I think that opened the door for me, because after the Confed Cup was completed, one of the colleagues, I think it was Siko, he told me about an opportunity at Media 24, the what do they call it again? The Media 24 Journalism Academy, which I applied for, and luckily was one of the 16 interns which were chosen, and then we started working in 2016. So I was an intern at Media 24 Academy in 2016. What I loved about that experience, it allowed all of us to have an experience, or just have a hand in different parts of the media, so print media, online as well, and so newspapers and magazines, they gave us that opportunity. So yeah, I've been working in sports media since then, 2010, as an intern, and now I am in radio, but I still write. I love writing, and I stopped for a bit when I started in radio, but then I had to go back because something was missing. So yeah, I am today.
Busi, what's interesting is that, I mean, you're seen today as like the go-to person when it comes to women's sports in particular, right?
Yeah.
Was that by design? Is that what you chose to almost, I'll say major in, but almost, is that your main focus? Did you choose that, or did that just happen through your different experiences? Because you look at an individual like myself, Linda, as well as Vaylen, I think we cover a myriad of sports. And in particular, for me, primarily I cover the male-dominated sporting arena. So for you, was that a choice that you made to say, listen, I want to focus more on women's sports and women athletes?
Honestly, that's not how it started for me. In 2010, I was an intern with the Daily Sun. I remember I was doing a few sports here and there. Obviously, as a junior, you are not given all the, you don't do the major stories. And when the Sasso League National Championships came in May 2010, I was given that opportunity to travel to Polokwane to cover that tournament. And already I already loved women's football, when I went there, or before I even started working as well. But going to the Sasso League National Championships just made me fall in love more with women's football. And I got to start relationships with the players. And I somehow felt or just knew more about their lives. That, okay, fine, you're playing football, but you are a full-time student at UJ. I remember with the first time meeting Amanda Dlamini was in Polokwane, rather, at the Sasso League National Championships. Like, she was playing for Devon Ladies. And I'm like, you're a full-time student and you're playing football as well. How does that happen? So from there on, I just wanted to highlight more the plight of women's sports, and from there on, I just rose from there on and continued to write more on women's football and women's other sports and netball. That's how it started for me.
Linda, this is interesting, right? Because I don't know if you could give advice maybe to say for potential women that want to get into the media industry. Should we embrace the fact that, like Busisiwe has rightfully said, obviously we'll understand the women's game more because we understand the experiences. We also understand some of the pitfalls and the difficulties in making it in this very male-dominated industry. So, from your viewpoint, should you, as a young female wanting to get into the sports media industry, focus more on women's sports, or should you know what I mean, cover all sports or try as well to break through in this very male-dominated area?
So in terms of what Busi is saying, I can relate completely because there was a time when I covered the Banyana in those early days when Fran was still coaching the team. And I remember consistently going to their training sessions, to their camps, et cetera, et cetera. And basically my advice would be, you need to get a feel as much as possible for all codes of sports, but try and find a particular niche which you can expand on, explore, leverage on, something that isn't covered extensively. For instance, when I started, for instance, it was at a very, very critical time when the country was starting its democracy just post 94, and we were getting back into the international sporting arena after being kicked out of the Olympics all those years ago and so forth. So it was a very fascinating time of transformation, the amalgamation of all the different sports bodies in South Africa, which had previously been divided according to race lines and so forth. You had a lot of international sporting bodies and sports individuals and personalities coming to the country, getting involved in discussions, contributing into wanting to shape the future of South African sport. So it was a very interesting time, and I thought, look, that was a niche, and that's where I excelled in. But invariably, I covered as many of the sports as possible, and I built on that. And then, of course, you have to earn your stripes. Invariably, do your research, work your butt off, and I'm sure all of you girls have your own little stories. I mean, I remember. In the early days when I would literally work 7 days a week. There was a time when the City Press had a daily newspaper, and we worked both on the Sunday newspaper and the daily newspaper. And I would literally go to the townships and trawl for stories over the weekends and just watch, youngsters playing disky, not necessarily because I was looking for a story per se, but just getting a feel of what was going on out there and looking for, human interest type stories and so forth, and understanding, the challenges that different, young girls and boys were going through, as they played in those dusty sports fields and so forth. So work your heart out, ask as many questions as possible. Nothing is stupid in terms of questioning. Probe, be inquisitive. And endear yourself to people, really, really have an interest in people's lives, and particularly in sports, men and women's lives. because these people, after all, are just like you and me. What makes them tick, basically? Where have they grown up? What inspires them, and so forth. And you'll find that there's actually quite a lot of interesting stories to tell, around issues like that. So that's, yeah, in essence, that's the kind of advice I would provide.
Yes, yes, and yes. I agree with all that you just said, Linda. Vaylen, tell us a little bit about your journey in terms of finding your sports identity, deciding that this is who Vaylen is going to be in the sports industry. How did that come about, and what were some of the influencing factors?
If you have to ask me what my sports identity is in sports media, I can't tell you. I think that I've always just followed my heart and worked to the best of my ability with the opportunities that I've been given. And first and foremost, I see myself as a storyteller. I love doing what I do. I love being in communications because I love telling stories. That keeps me interested in people, just like Linda mentioned. You have to be curious. You have to ask questions. You have to have that passion to want to tell other people's stories, to see where there are stories, because everywhere there is something to tell. There's something interesting. There's something inspirational. There's something magnificent. There's something for us to learn from. And I think that if you have to ask me what my identity is, I remember trying to do one of these, like, what's your brand, like how you're going to sell yourself and stuff like that. And I must say I find those things quite intimidating, if I'm completely honest, because I have valued the authenticity in the people that I speak to. That's what I really value. That's what I really try whenever I speak to people, try and get it out of them. And I try and be that too. And I think that my experiences have shaped me to be where I am now. So when I say that it makes me a little bit uncomfortable, that's not at all to say that I don't know who I am or I have some identity crisis. Yep. It's just to say that I live in a moving, evolving world, and I feel that it's fantastic that I can move and evolve too. And every day I can also learn something, and I don't have to be put into a box, and I'm certainly not going to put myself into a box.
Yeah, you can tell us a bit more about this, and I'll also add, if you look at your experience in terms of production and broadcasting, for sports organizations and federations, what kind of advice would you give to them, perhaps, to make particularly women in sport content, to make it more appealing so that it can feature more and more on primetime platforms and slots?
I mean, I think anybody that's involved in communications, they need content. So if you as an organization, if you as a federation, if you as a manager for an athlete are providing that content, providing those athletes or the newsmakers, if you're providing them to be spoken to, we will speak to them. We will feature the stories, because that is all of us in communications. That's what we're looking for each and every single day. We're looking for stories. We're looking for angles. We're looking for a different take on certain things. So for me, I think that if there's advice to give to different federations or different people that may be involved in the sports industry, is to say, provide the content, make people available so that we can talk to them. Because when you open yourself up to the media, that's when they're able to cover the story. If you're going to keep your story to yourself, well, then no one will know.
Yeah, and we won't be interested either if you're going to be difficult to get a hold of. Agreed. Yeah. Everyone that's watching, we see you all saying hi from all across the globe. In fact, welcome to this very exciting webinar. Don't forget, send through your questions and your comments as well. If you have any questions for any of us here, part of the panelists, we're here to discuss, we're here to talk. Hi, Rory-san, great to see you as well, a part of this. Busi, tell us a little bit also, just expanding on what it is that Vaylen has said. What advice can you give journalists as well in terms of improving the coverage of women in sport?
For me, I think it's very important to have a niche, have something that you are really passionate in covering. It's very also important to learn and know as many codes as possible, but you have to have that specialty that people know you by, so that when an opportunity for something comes, the first person that they think of is you, because you have carved away in that beat. But what is more important again is relationships. When you are a young journalist, it's very important to make relationships. One, a relationship with the athletes, it will make you, they'll become more comfortable with you. They will be able to let you into their world, so that they're able to tell you all the other stories that they do not tell journalists that they see once in a while, at press conferences. Which is why it's important, what Melinda was saying, is that go to events, go to a Sasol League game, don't only go there because you have been assigned to report on that state game. Go there, just learn and know the people. Just watch around. You learn about the teams that are playing there. You learn about the players as well. It's very important that to go to matches, not just only matches that are seen as big, because there'll be a lot of people there, and then you might not get a chance to either speak to the players that you want to, especially when you have not made relationships with them prior to that big event. So it's very important to attend events, not only to report, but also to learn. So if you are going to think, okay, you know what, I'll just go to the Soweto Derby only. The Soweto Derby is big. And already the people who are major players there, whether the administrators or the players themselves, they've already identified people that they are comfortable with. And it will be very difficult for you to get that story that you want, even though maybe, the question that you want to ask is very important and might bring out a big story. But if you do not make prior relationships, it becomes very hard for you to make inroads, for you to grow in that space. Another thing that I wanted to say is surround yourself with people who have knowledge on that set sport. So for me, I surround myself with a lot of people who are in women's sports. I surround myself with a lot of people who work in women's football as administrators and coaches, and just players themselves, because through them I learn about other teams and other players who are not maybe in the national team space, so that by the time they go to national level, I already know their background, because I've learned from the people that I surround myself with who have already been in the industry, even though they're not working as in sports media, but they are in the sports industry themselves. And then it makes you get better chances, at uncovering bigger stories or learning more, because now by learning from them, you open. It's very, what I like saying is that learning doesn't stop. You learn every day. You learn about the people that you work with. You learn about yourself as well. But it's also very important to unlearn some of the things that might hinder your progress, your growth. Just be open to learning and unlearning sometimes bad habits. So,
never get comfortable as well. Never get comfortable. You always challenge yourself. And as you rightfully said, the learning doesn't stop. 20 years in the industry, I'm still learning things. And I'm still, changing things about the way that I do sport broadcasting as well. Linda, I mean, we're talking more about, oh, by the way, Busi, when you said Melinda, I thought you said Melinda. I was like, we don't have a Melinda. Melinda.
Oh, you're making me feel so old.
I mean, Linda, we're talking so much about television and radio and print journalism, but the reality is that there's such a myriad of career opportunities and outlets for women that want to get involved in sports media in particular. I want you to talk to us about sports editors or newspaper editors. I mean, you don't find a lot of women doing that. How did you manage to break into that, and why aren't we seeing more women doing in those roles?
So that's a very interesting question, Carol. I think one thing that is very key and very important, especially when you're charting out your career and you're moving along, you obviously have to have a few people that sort of back you along the way, who support you, preferably a mentor or two. And I remember distinctly, obviously, having started out in sports specifically, And then when we moved across the City Press to start Sunday Sun newspaper, still doing sport, my editor at the time called me aside, and I, didn't think that far ahead in terms of what else I wanted to do in the next couple of years. But he basically called me aside, had a private chat with me, and basically said, look, you're good, obviously good at what you do, but if you want to rise up the ranks, you're going to have to take a slight detour, because it's very rare that a sports journalist ends up being an editor. And he basically said, I want to give you that opportunity. Take a detour. I want you to start getting involved on the news side of the newspaper. And then let's see how it goes. And the rest, they say, is history. So from there, I got involved in the news section, became news editor, worked my way up to assistant editor, and then ultimately took over the reins from him for a few years after that. And from there, after that, a couple of years, then branched out, as I indicated, into communications and so forth. So in a sense, it takes sometimes someone else having belief in your experiences, in your capabilities, and perhaps, just giving you a bit of a nudge here and there, and providing you with guidance, and as I indicated, sort of mentoring you, and helping you to acquire the necessary skills to eventually become, a head of a newspaper, essentially. But it's still a rarity where a sports individual ultimately heads, a newspaper, because you'll find a lot of the time it's your general news writers, it's your political reporters, and so forth. But it's not impossible at all, Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we've had a series on mentorship as part of the SA Women in Sport Foundation webinar. So I think that was another interesting one here. We also saw part of this webinar is Fran Hilton-Smith. Hi, Fran, who's loving it, saying we've got some really great guests joining us on Facebook. Great to have you, Fran, as well. Here's another thing is that because we're involved in such a male-dominated industry as a whole, when I was starting out, people naturally assumed that because I had such an interest and a knowledge of sports, and I was working in this industry, then I had to be a tomboy, which was not the case. I'm very much a girly girl. Vaylen, and I'm actually going to ask you all this question. I don't know, Vaylen, but you can start off. Did you ever feel the need to over masculinize yourself, perhaps, in order to fit in into this industry and to prove how competent you were in this industry? I never did, but did you find instances where you felt like you had to appear a little harder, a little more masculine to make it?
I remember a comment once, and this was quite early on, the sense of, but you never played the sport, so how can you know? And that was almost something that followed a lot of women when they got involved in sports broadcasting, certainly what I can remember a couple of years ago. And perhaps my take would be different if I got involved in women's sports broadcasting now, because I think the landscape is completely different to when I first got involved. And I recall one of the best comebacks to that, and that was, you don't have to give birth to know how to be a good parent. And that kind of really made me, settle things for me. And I realized I am unique, and I offer something unique to what I do. I offer something unique to the world, and I offer something unique to the space that I'm in. So if I felt pressurized to try and be something that I wasn't, I was an outsider anyway. So I was never going to be fitting in. So I just embraced that. And I think that maybe other women in sports journalism, in sports media, would have the same thing. You're anyway an outsider, So you embrace that, you work with it, you enjoy the space, and you remain authentic to yourself. And that actually gives you a lot of strength. And it's also the reason why you're there, because you bring something unique.
Yeah, I agree. I'd always say that, women have such an important role to play because, if you look at mothers, for example, they raise your future sporting icons. They're the ones that push their young women to raise the future, of the sporting industry. So hence, we just need to look at that and say we definitely have a role to play. Busi, just continuing this trail of thought. Because you look at the sports industry, obviously it's got the stigma, and it's a reality that it is a very masculine industry. So by default, people just think that maybe defeminizing women's sports is something that's going to be unavoidable if we want to see women's sports grow. What's your take on that, especially when you look at women's football?
I think, well, number one, I grew up tomboy. I've got 4 brothers, so naturally I was going to be tomboy. But I think it's very important that we let people be. Number one, I like saying that we can't market women's football the same way that we market men's football. It's not the same. So yes, as much as we would love to bring in new followers of the game, but for us to attract them to the game, we can't market it the same way as we market men's football. So for that point, I don't think that it has to be changed for whatever reason. We just have to let it be the same way as it is now, because if we try to change it, and then it's going to become what it's not. So no, I don't think so. I don't think we should change it just to maybe make the industry, if I can put it that way, to become comfortable. But then, because if we do, and then we'll bring people in who are not really genuine about that, like following that sport, which in turn they won't stay. They will be involved for a little while and then realize, no, this is not what I was told. Why did I come? And then they go away. So we should just market it for what it is. We should not change it to please one, or to bring some form of false hope. It won't work. It definitely will not work.
Yeah, because I think that this is something that athletes and sports organizations, particularly those that deal with women's sports, that they've struggled with, just trying to grapple with the identity of sport. You'll remember it as well with women's football here, thinking maybe we need to put the ladies in skirts and make them seem a little bit more feminine. It will be an easier product to sell. You remember that, Vaylen? You will as well. Maybe it'll make it an easier product to sell. And maybe some of the other sporting codes as well, thinking maybe we should do a photo shoot where they're looking a little bit more glam and more feminine, and just trying to find the balance has been such a difficult thing. I mean, it's like, what more do you need to do in order to sell, women's sport? Must they look more attractive? Because the reality is that they can't look more masculine because they're not men, because I know that that's something that even athletes and sports federations have grappled with.
Carol, sorry, just on that, because I know that Fran is a part of our webinar at the moment. She tells a very funny story about when they put together the very first Banyana Banyana team back in 1993, where Terry Payne was their coach, and Anthea Childs was their captain at the time, and they played against Swaziland, and they had given them skirts to wear with stockings, and none of the women wanted to sit in the front row when they were actually taking the photo, because they all felt so uncomfortable in these skirts and these stockings. And Francis, her and Dara, who was also helping out with the Banyana Banyana team, she came, and she was a manager of the team for a long time. They saw them walking And all the girls, you could just see, like, they're so used to, they've got like big muscular legs, as you must have as a football player. And they were all so uncomfortable in these stockings and these tight kind of below the knee skirts. And they were like, okay, first and last time. And that is it. These girls, we're never putting the women in these skirts and hosiery again, because it's just not them. And you have to stay true to the sport and true to the people.
Linda, you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, and I think also just to add to what Busisiwe and Vaylen are saying, I think it's also about time that we look at sports for sports just being sport itself. I know invariably you have women's teams and men's teams and so forth, but if you look at Banyana's performance, for example, if you look at the American women's football team, for example, I mean, they are like incredible in terms of their performance. I mean, they perform far more better than their male counterparts, in essence. They get quite a lot of attention. And I think the onus is on, newsrooms, TV stations, and so forth, to start actually looking at codes just for the sake of the fact that it's football. The fact that it's incidentally a women's side or a men's side is neither here or there. And I think as soon as you start actually looking at all of these different teams on par and giving them equal attention and equal focus and so forth, there's no reason why sponsors shouldn't start queuing up, for instance. I mean, obviously, results matter. So if you play incredibly well, if you play poorly, then obviously there's no sponsor that's going to support a team that plays badly. But surely that should be an impetus that if you as a women's soccer player are treated equally in a sense to your Bafana counterpart, and you pour your heart out on that pitch, and it eventually, bears results. I don't see any reason why eventually that the money shouldn't start rolling in, and that broadcasters especially see that it's a good thing, and it attracts, advertising and so forth.
Ultimately, Linda, everyone's got a role to play, as you rightfully said. The athletes have to excel. They have to be at their very best. And once they deliver that, then the broadcasters will come on board, because if you're winning, tournament after tournament, and you're bringing in the results, like what we're seeing with our women's cricket team, our netballers, Banyana, all of our women's footballers, if the results are coming in, then the fans, they want to see more of the ladies. So broadcasters come on board, and they have to, if you as a journalist or sports broadcaster are the very best that there is, like you say, work 10 times harder, do your research, be so well prepared. If you're the best, one of the best in the world, that is only also going to grow the perception of women in the sports media. Busi, I wanted to ask you one here, because you're an individual, you're a journalist who's never afraid to really be brave and report some stories that maybe might not, when it comes to the women's game, might not reflect very well in the women's game. What advice can you give some of those up-and-coming female sports journalists in terms of being brave and tackling the truth?
I don't even know how to start with this one. But what is important is always tell the truth. Always try to find all the sides of the story. I think what sets me apart is that apart from wanting to, change the face of women's sports in the country, by reporting, the adversities that they face, I also challenge the federations to do better by these athletes, by the sport as well. So for me, I don't even know how to put this. So for me to learn how to challenge, all the, I don't want to say reporting on controversial stories.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what was important for me is the relationships that I've built over the years with these players, whether in netball or football, that become so comfortable to telling me everything that they're experiencing when, especially, they are at national level. It's the relationship. So now they're comfortable to come to me to tell me about this. Sometimes it's scary. There have been times when I didn't want to write a certain story because I was afraid of what might come afterwards. But I think I've learned that when I take a step back and not report on those, the players and the administrators will continue suffering. So I guess someone has to be brave enough to take that I don't want to say take that fall, but someone has to be brave enough to stand up and report on those. Recently I wrote the article.
kit.
Yes, the kit article.
That trended.
Yes. And after that, they made sure.
Okay, wait. But for those that don't know, just take us through that. Because when I read that story, I thought, did you grapple with, do I write about this? Because it so reflects badly on the women's game, but at the same time, this is a reality. And if you're going to contribute to changing the narrative, you have to speak out about it. But just tell those that are not aware of what you're talking about.
Okay, so in, I think, October, SAFA called in a list of Banyana players who would get into camp, and they would sort of, I don't want to say trial, but would want to get into the team that would play and represent South Africa at the COSAFA Women's Championship. So after the team was selected, one of my very good sources, they've been my source for a couple of years now. They told me that there isn't a kit. The only kit that's there is the Nike kit. So Banyana would not be playing in the new technical sponsored Le Coq Sportif. It took me a very long time, and I must be honest, because I got the tip from different sources. I think 3, like those people who I really, really trust with my stories. They told me, and I sat on the story for about a week. And I eventually spoke to my manager about it, Henry, and I told him that there's something like this that's happening. Banyana do not have a kit, from the new sponsors. And he asked me, why don't you write it? I was like, yeah, no, but I'm not so sure about writing it. What would happen if players are found out or sources are found out to have told me this. He convinced me to write about it, and I also spoke to my former editor, Musibudi Whitehead, and I also told him, like, why are you not writing this? And then after that, I approached my editor at the New Frame. I told him about the story, and it was like, okay, please write the story. We'll publish the story just before the COSAFA Women's Championship started. So I wrote the story. I spoke to the head of, I think it was head of buying at Le Coq Sportif. And he told me that there weren't any plans to get Banyana into the Le Coq Sportif kit, only until next year they will wear the kit. I called the SAFA CEO. I asked him, and he wasn't pleased, because he said to me, if I knew you were going to ask me this, I wasn't going to take your call. I wrote the story, and it was published. And then when Banyana got to PE for the tournament, there was suddenly a kit for them.
Mm-hmm.
The kit that they wore was the men's cut. So the women's cut kit for the national teams hasn't been produced as yet. It's not out as yet. Even if we can go to the Lagok Sportif website currently, it says Bafana Bafana kit. The away kit, the home kit, and the alternative kit, it's all Bafana Bafana. There isn't a women's cut of the kit. So I wrote that story. And it trended, and I'm glad that it actually trended because it trended. Banyana got the new kit, even though it's not a women's cut of the kit, but at least they got to wear it. Unfortunately, 17 women's wore Nike, throughout that tournament. So I think it's very important to tell this kind of stories, because if no one tells this kind of stories, nothing will happen, nothing will change, especially for the female athletes. I remember last year, January, I wrote a story that Banyana players were about to boycott the why am I forgetting the name of the tournament now? I forgot the name of the tournament, but it was played in Cape Town in January with Sweden and the Netherlands as well. The players were not paid for qualifying for the World Cup and the other matches as well. I wrote that story. It came out on a Thursday. I think the players the game was on a Saturday, so the Mail and Guardian published the story on Thursday evening for the Friday newspaper. And Friday, suddenly after the story was out, SAFA had a meeting with the players, and they agreed that they get their money, and I think they were paid partially. So it's very important that the stories are told so that those players get what they deserve.
So for you, more good has come out of being brave than bad. So is that something that you would encourage young journalists to do as well? Like you say, tell the truth, tell those stories.
Tell the truth, because that's what journalism is about. Telling the truth, finding out all sides of the stories, and just presenting the facts. That's all. Just be brave in presenting those facts. Just find out from all the sides, and then just lay bare the facts. But make sure not to take sides. That's not your position. Not your position to take sides in any story. Yours is to present the facts and allow people who are reading to take sides for themselves. Don't be subjective, in a story that you're telling.
Linda,
if I could possibly add to that, Carol, I can relate fully to what Busi is saying. I've written many kinds of stories where Banyana players have not been paid and whatever, and it seems to be a continual problem. But one thing I'd like to highlight is that in doing this kind of work, other than your relationships, your sources and so forth, it's very, very important that you know what the issues are, that you are very au fait with what's happening behind the scene, that you probe, that you dig and so forth. Who are the major players? What are the issues and so forth? So you can actually challenge those in power and can talk truth to power. It's very important because you can never go wrong, and they can never take you for granted if you know your material, you know the content, and then you can easily challenge them in essence. So I think it's very, very important that you be very knowledgeable about your subject matter, basically.
Busi, Mel Owl says, thank you so much for being brave. Say hi to Mel, who's watching.
I know, thank you. I just want to say something quickly. It's unfortunate that I'm still telling the same story Melinda told in her days as a journalist, that women, I don't want to say Banyana players only, but female athletes are still getting the short end of the stick.
Yep.
That narrative needs to change. And I think when you if we have more people who tell this kind of stories, I think we might be able to force the hand of the people in power to change their ways so that, female athletes are treated better.
More of these conversations, more webinars like this as well. Stephanie Lupepe says we need to have these honest conversations. That's right, more honest conversations. And we need to get more of this information out there, so that we can eventually see overwhelming change. Linda, I wanted to ask you about, because you've been involved in so many different aspects of media. You've worked media, academic, government sectors. So tell us about being able to diversify your work experience when you're coming from a sports background. Because now we're seeing more and more, let's say, former athletes or individuals that have studied some form of sports, now trying to see the different avenues that they can pursue when it comes to careers.
So yes, as you've indicated, Carol, I've worked in different sectors and so forth. So what I loved about what I learned in journalism basically is that the guiding principles in terms of writing well researched pieces, balanced pieces, pieces that will grab people's attention, that have readability and so forth. All those principles still remain the same, irrespective of what field you're in. So basically, whether you're in academic sphere and communications or in another sphere in terms of communications, those basic principles still remain the same. And you basically still apply them. And then over and above that, of course, with my journalism background, I basically leveraged on that, heavily on that, because I had a very good understanding of how the media worked, how stories were packaged, how stories were put together, what the challenges were in terms of journalists, the deadlines that they had to keep and to honor to get their stories into the newspaper for the newspaper the following day and so forth. I basically understood, even, how those newspapers were put together. I've been in the presses and seen the papers roll off the presses and so forth. So using all that content and all that information, basically you can leverage on it and then, be able to basically package, stories, make them very newsworthy and so forth. And be able to use that to grab people's attention, essentially.
Vaylen, tell us about, because it's, as sport broadcasters and working in sports media, Dibisani, hey, saying big up for your boldness, Busi. Dibisani Chalke, thank you. Dimaka Tomolete says, we need more women like you in our world and mostly in our course. Thank you so much, very much, Sis Busi. Fran, saying that we've all supported women footballers. That's right. Not just women footballers, women athletes, in fact, in different spheres. Bisachibwe, big up Busisiwe for the insights and bravery of bringing facts out. Unfortunately, for some of your colleagues in the industry, they don't follow up on such. At least he's doing it. Yeah, it's true. I wanted to talk, Vaylen, about your connection and your relationship with your audience. Tell us about that, because, as sports broadcasters, you've got such an important role to play to communicate and to add to how sport is viewed, how sport is enjoyed via the audience. Tell us about your connection to the audience that watches you.
I think that, just what makes anybody or why I'm interested in sport, I'm excited by it. I'm excited by the talent. I'm excited by, the performance. I'm excited by the stories of the people that I cover. And I think that what I try my utmost to do is to translate that and to communicate that as best as I can to the audience, because once you understand the sport that it is that you're covering, you can see that, but also you come from the point of view of being a fan, but also being a communicator. So you've got that ability to be able to, manage and mediate how you actually communicate that. So I think for me, the most important thing is really to do just that, is to bring across that excitement, bring across the authenticity, bring across what I see, what I imagine makes other people excited about this specific sport, because that is what sport is. I mean, sport gets people excited. That's why you've got fans in the first place, So you want to be able to communicate that. And I think that's what your relationship is built on, because you are able to bring across what people love about a sport. I mean, it's very different, right? So I've been very privileged to have had different roles within sports broadcasting. So from a Monday to a Friday, I present and produce the Sport on Morning Live, on a national breakfast show, which is news. And through that, I get to do more sports news stories. So one of the big interviews that I did this year was with Makai Ntini, where he shared some really heart-wrenching, very personal experiences when he was with the national Proteas team, and the discrimination that he felt. So that's a very different kind of a thing to when I am presenting the Comrades Marathon broadcast on SABC2, where I'm speaking directly to fans and sharing, a 13-hour-long broadcast. So I think it also just depends on the platform that you're on, in terms of how you're going to communicate with the audience. Because specifically, like I mentioned, sports news, you are looking at angles, you're looking at telling 2 sides, 3 sides, all sides of a specific story. It's a little bit different to when you may have advertising and sponsors to consider when you're doing a different kind of a live sports broadcast. And they are very different. And I think it's important that you're aware of those things, which I think that I am. And when you ask how you manage your relationship with your audience, I think it's really understanding what your role is on the platform that you're on, whether it's on television, whether it's on radio, the broadcast that you're a part of, and the show that you're a part of.
Yeah, agreed. I always say that I let my passion guide me. And people can see that. Yes, sure, I'm knowledgeable, but first and foremost, I'm very passionate about sports as a whole. So that's why it's almost seamless, and it doesn't even seem like work when I have to go on air and I'm talking about sport, because I have such a deep love and passion for sports, globally. And that brings with it the understanding, the compassion and the knowledge that I have for it. And people can see that, they relate to that. They can see that, wow, she really loves this. She's really passionate about not what she does, but about her subject matter, about the sport. So I definitely agree with that. We've been going through some really interesting times, obviously with COVID-19 now, where we're starting to understand the power of the different platforms now that are utilized when it comes to talking about sports. It's such a changing landscape of sports media. Linda, tell us about this. I mean, social media now, also digital, having such an important role to play in sport. How do you kind of manage and maneuver your way through this ever-changing sporting landscape?
It's very critical. It's very challenging, and I think it's especially for anyone out there who's going to be interacting with journalists and so forth. It's very important to understand the terrain in which they're operating in, as you've indicated now. A lot of journalists now tweet, there's Facebook and so forth. There's a lot of online media usage as well and so forth. Another thing you also obviously have to understand is that because of economic challenges, not only with COVID, but previously as well, a lot of the newsrooms now have shrunk. A lot of, newsrooms have more junior people rather than senior people. A lot of the journalists now are multitasking. So whereas previously you specialized in one or two areas, you are now forced to multitask over a certain number of subject matter or a number of certain codes. So you need to understand that they're actually juggling all these different, balls, and they're under severe pressure. So it's very key and important that that you leverage on that. Understanding as well that there's also something which is called citizen journalism, that you are not only in competition with other newspapers and with other TV companies and so forth, that you're actually in competition with people, with ordinary members of the public themselves, who in themselves are actually news people, because people tweet incessantly about anything and everything. And there's also a great level of trust when it comes to that and issues around that. So you have to understand the terrain and be able to maneuver it, essentially, and then appreciate the pressures that journalists now have to deal with and have to cope with. And in terms of when you engage them and so forth, that you actually support them in this quest of trying to get the information out speedily in bite-sized chunks, that you don't ramble on, that you keep to the point and so forth. And something I'd also recommend as well is that, as and when necessary, especially if you're a sportsman or woman or an administrator where possible, get a bit of media training as well, because that will also equip you with being able to deal with the media. How to engage with them, what to say and what not to say, and so forth, especially if you're a spokesperson of a particular federation and so forth. Or even if you're doorstopped by a journalist and you're asked something and you don't know how to respond or whatever, and you say the wrong things, that you're able to maneuver and deal with that. So that's also very important as well.
This is a big one as well, gender equality. Do you think, I'm going to start off with you, Busi. Do you think that the sports media industry at large is doing enough to advocate for gender equality within sports? From my angle, and with the broadcasters that I work with, SuperSport International, as well as Premier League Productions, for example, I'd say definitely yes. We're doing as much as we can. We're starting to see an intentional push to have more young female sports broadcasters being brought on board, with the DSTV Diski Challenge. They want to make sure that we're bringing in individuals that have never been on television before. So the young up and coming stars and the young up and coming talent. And when it comes to on-screen personnel, it's been 100% only women that have been introduced. And you'll see, obviously, ahead of the 2019-20 season and the campaign, you saw the female anchors and sport broadcasters really being brought to the fore. So we're playing such a leading role. I'm seen as the face of the SuperSport broadcasting team. So they're really actively doing that, trying to bring forth and bridge that gap when it comes to gender equality. But Busisiwe, when you look at other spheres, do you think that the media industry as a whole is doing enough for this?
I think over the years, we've seen a lot of women being introduced into the media space, both in radio, space that I work in now, also in print as well. But honestly speaking, getting into sports media is not easy, because you have to prove your worth. You somewhat have to show how genuine you are about getting into the industry. Sometimes it is a bit hard for editors or sports editors to bring in females. I'm not saying we are not changing. Honestly speaking, over the past few years, it's changed a lot. From, if I can say, maybe an example, in 2015, I'd be maybe one, or maybe there'd be two of us women at a press conference, maybe at a let me just say PSL press conference, and not just men's football press conference. And now there's a lot more of us in different areas. Others are writing, others are on radio, others are on TV as well. So it is changing slowly, but it's very important to show you how genuine you are about getting into this industry, because I feel personally that some of the young ladies who want to get into sports media think it's all about the
Glamour. Yes.
It's not there. It's not there. If you want to get into sports journalism because you think that PSL awards, traveling the world, traveling the continent, doing all those things, it's not about that. The hard work that goes in is a lot. So you need to know that you have to work quite hard also, and forget about yourself. You are not the story. Yes, maybe we'd like to see you to know who the person behind the story is, but you are not the story. You must not overshadow the story. So I think that's one of the reasons why maybe a lot of young women are sort of struggling to get into sports media, because sometimes you look at their social media. Okay, this person says they DM you like, oh, I'd like you to mentor me. I want to get into sports media, and we're like, okay, let me just check out their social media, and you look at the things that they post. You be like, you know what? I don't know. I'm not so sure if this person really wants to get into this industry because they want to work. So I think that's one of the reasons that makes it harder for change, or maybe to getting in more young women into sports media.
And if I could possibly add to what Busi is saying as well, let's face facts. We also get a bad rap in that sometimes we are accused of, sleeping your way up to the top and so forth, simply because you're a woman and so forth. And it's very important, is what Busi is saying, is, remain very true to yourself, keep your integrity and so forth. And then they will learn to respect you for who you are and the quality of work that you produce, essentially. I had a very strange experience where, for some funny reason, there was a point when I was covering SASCOG quite a lot. And we went to the Olympics, we came back, and then I happened to buy a new car. And then there was a rumor that I heard that the head of SASCOG apparently purchased this car for me out of the blue. And it was very, very weird. And I couldn't understand where it was coming from. It just left center. But it's things like that which can, be very upsetting. But you shouldn't allow them to unnerve you. Basically, you should, just remain steadfast and true to yourself and to your profession and to your integrity, like Busi indicates.
Yeah. Vaylen, more advice for aspiring sports broadcasters or anyone that wants to be involved in sports media?
Yeah. I said it right at the top. I think that you need to be authentic to yourself. You are an outsider to begin with. Embrace that. Embrace who you are. Embrace your passions. Embrace what your goals are, and then stick by them. And I think that nothing will then sway you from your morals, from your ethics, and from your principles. And in that way, you are going to be able to be brave, be able to tell good stories, be able to tell other people's stories, and make sure that you yourself are doing your work the honor that it deserves, because you sit in a privileged position to be able to speak to people and tell that story to others. And I think that must never be lost. The fact that people open up and tell you stuff, That is huge. And you've got a responsibility to be able to share that. That's why you sit in the position that you do. That's why you've got the platforms that you do. And that's why I say, for me, it's most important to understand that you're a storyteller first and foremost. You asked Linda about the new technologies. I think that if you are in media and you see yourself as a communicator, as a storyteller, while the new tools can be quite intimidating, you can also look at it as another way, another tool to use to be able to do what you essentially are doing anyway, and that is telling stories. And you're telling other people's stories, and you are able to communicate it in different ways, because it can be overwhelming with the amount of tools that are out there, with the strains that Linda explained that are currently on newsrooms. And that's not just print, that's all over, in television, in radio, in print, online. Everybody's newsrooms are under pressure. And there's a deluge of information and not a lot of understanding, which is why communication at the moment and being a good storyteller, being a good journalist is so important right now, because you need to be able to use all this information in a way to present something that actually tells a story that helps people understand what is really going on. Because you guys know we are inundated with information and not a lot of knowledge. And I think that that's the place that journalists currently hold, and people that are in the media space, they have to be able to provide that for people, to give them an understanding of how to make sense of all this information that is actually going on around, and that is reliable information, and a story that is actually reliable. I wanted to offer something different with regards to gender equality. We operate in the environment that we're in, right? So when we began this conversation, I said, I think that my experience, Carol, Linda's experience, Busi's experience, they're all reflective of the environment and the world that we were in at that time when we got involved in sports broadcasting. And I think now, with more and more women's sport becoming professional, there are also opportunities for more women to get involved in sports broadcasting, purely because the sporting landscape is also opening up. There's never been more money in women's football. There's never been more money in women's cricket. And there's never been more money in women's netball. So all of these things are also making sure that there are more opportunities for other people that are interested in actually covering sport.
Okay, we've got some questions that have come in. Thank you so much, guys, for sending them through. Rory Sang says, irrespective of one finding their niche and excelling, I'd like to find out, why is it that we don't have more or enough women reporters and or journalists that are tapping into the rugby market? Great question, Rory Sang. All right, so for me, my answer would be, obviously, like you said, it's about finding your strengths. You know, I'm very well-rounded, but ultimately, I've got my sporting codes that I love more than anything. You know, boxing for me was number one before even football. But I got involved so much more in football because it's the biggest, it's the most popular globally, and it was, I think also, I mean, I love football as well, but for me, it was also the easiest way for me to appeal to a global audience, which has always been my driving force behind excelling in the sports industries, that I always wanted to be seen as a global individual. So football has helped me to advance that and to really grow when it comes to that. Whereas with boxing, you know, I'm a ring announcer and I really love my boxing, but if I was given an opportunity to ring announce a fight on the same night as a major football match that would be playing, the audience, obviously, and the number of audiences that would be tuned into the football as opposed to the boxing would negate the fact that I would ultimately have to work on the more popular offering for the broadcaster. But I don't know, Busi, you know, why not enough for more female rugby media individuals?
Yeah, I do not want to speak for people that are working mainly in rugby, but I think what you said earlier is very true. So if you look at your strength where it is. Yes, when I started working, women's football was not really at the top, but because over the years I've learned so many things about women's football, the relationships that I've built as well. That's why mainly my focus is on women's football and just women's sports in general. So you look at the strengths that you have and focus on those, and you try to sharpen them more. I really don't know why there aren't as many women who are in rugby per se. I know there are a lot of women who love rugby, but I don't know, maybe opportunities are not there as much. I really don't want to speculate, but I don't know really.
Perhaps just to add as well, it's a similar scenario, I would imagine, also in cricket as well. There aren't that many female journalists on the print side. I know there's a couple of obviously female commentators that are coming through the fore and so forth. So it's a level of where does your interest lie, and also, you know, how persistent you are in terms of making your mark in that particular field. I mean, I know a friend of mine who used to cover cricket, Vida Tong, and she used to tell me all these endless stories of, especially the first time when she used to go into the dressing room after a game. And obviously that was a rarity to see a female, let alone a female journalist who covers cricket, who had the audacity or the gall to actually go into the dressing room, you know, after the game. But the thing is, that's where the story is, in essence. It's not on the pitch, because she had to engage, you know, the players and so forth, and the best place to do it was in the dressing room. And she used to tell me how she used to, you know, have to walk in and sort of, you know, blinkered sort of approach and sort of warn them, you know, lady in the room sort of thing, you know, so that they would all cover themselves quickly. But eventually they accepted her as one of the fold, so to speak, and, you know, she was able to make a mark. So it's just making sure that you persist in the area of or the field of your choice, and be prepared to overcome whatever hurdles that might come your way, essentially. Yeah.
I can relate. That it was the same for me as well when I started, and I was a field reporter, having to go into the dressing rooms and make sure that you are, you know, you remain focused, and you stick to the script, and yes, that the eyes, that you've got those blinkers, you know. This is an important one. I see we're running out of time. Sadly, we could go on and on. So this is an important one that we need to talk about, just in terms of advice. For those female athletes, in terms of, for example, preparing for an interview. Vaylen, what are some of the differences that you've seen? And I'll talk about my experience as well. When you're dealing with male athletes as opposed to female athletes, and how, just give the female athletes some pointers in order to sell themselves better as well.
Yeah, I think Linda mentioned it about if you know you're in a position where people are going to want to talk to you, then go and do yourself a favor and get a little bit of media training. Maybe it's even listening to a SAWASF's webinar, but understanding that you are the story. We want to know your story. That is why we're coming to you, and you've got to be open to be able to give that to us. And I think also the other thing that for the athletes to be able to prepare, other than seeing themselves as a brand, because I think that's maybe something that you were alluding to, Carol, is that male athletes really do understand that concept really, really well. They know that every time that they open up their mouth to a journalist, they're selling their brand. And they do it really, really well. And I think that that's certainly something that female athletes can learn from male athletes. But one piece of advice that I would like to give, other than to athletes and female athletes to make themselves available is also be ready for a difficult question. You know, of course we want to tell your story, but then there's also the job of asking maybe a question that you may not be that comfortable with. Have your answer. Prepare yourself. Know that these are topics that people are talking about, so that it doesn't throw you off and that you are able to answer. Be confident in yourself and also be confident in who you are. That'll help sell your brand first and foremost, which I think is what you never sense when you go to a male athlete. There's no lack of confidence when you speak to a male athlete, and that's what helps sell his brand. And I suppose, you know, women sometimes don't pat themselves on the back enough. They maybe don't see themselves as a brand enough because they don't want to come across as arrogant. And I think that they can leave that at the door. We want to speak to you as female athletes. Know that you're a brand. Be prepared for difficult questions. And if you want to, go and get some media training or speak to people that are in the media industry and ask them for some tips too.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, you're the star, ultimately, you know, and athletes need to start understanding that. You know, they've proven it on the field of play. So when you come up to a journalist for an interview, remember that they want you because you're the star. You know, they want to tell your story. So as you rightfully said, Vaylen, just that confidence, because that's a major difference when it comes to dealing with male athletes and female athletes, as you said. You know, just be confident in yourself and know that you are the star, you're the brand that we so sorely want and need. And we need to hear from you so that we can continue to sell your brand and to market it on a global platform. Busi, more advice for female athletes?
I think I actually agree with Vaylen.
Yeah.
What I've noticed over the years is that some, not most, not all female athletes do not want to speak to the media. I think they have misconceptions of, if I speak to the media, something negative about me will be, you know, printed or broadcast. And that's not the thing. Female athletes need to treat themselves as businesses, because the more you are on published, or maybe the more your story is told, the more we see you on TV, you are in the newspapers, that also attracts sponsorship. So now you'd be able to, you are selling yourself. So it's really important to make yourself available to the people who request to speak to you. So I think that for me, that's the main thing. Be available. If you are having issues on how to respond to questions, ask the media, ask someone who you trust in the media on how can I do better in when I answer questions, you know, whether difficult or easy questions, because sometimes you do get an athlete, you ask a question, a loaded question, and they respond with 3-5 words. You don't go with that. You know? So it's quite important to make yourself available, get a bit of media training. Treat yourself as a business, because the more we see businesses out there, we want to try their services. And the more you are out there, we want to tell your story more, and you'll get all that publicity, which will in turn at some point mean money for you in terms of sponsorship and other things as well.
Excellent stuff. You know what? We're running out of time. So I think those were fantastic closing comments from Vaylen and Busi. Thank you, ladies, so much. Linda, let's have a closing comment from you, like literally a couple of seconds, please.
I would say stay true to yourself, persevere. And like you said, have a passion or have a passion for what you're doing, essentially. And it'll serve you a long way.
Wow. Short and sweet. Thank you so much, Linda, for your expertise and being a part of this webinar. Big thanks, Vaylen, and continued success to all of you ladies in what it is that you do. You're flying the flag very, very high. And as you rightfully said, this is such an exciting industry to be a part of. It is global. It is growing more and more. So we are here to encourage more women to get involved. You have a role to play. So take your place and enjoy the ride. Thank you so much for being a part of it, for talking to us. I'm going to now hand over, of course, to our chairperson, who's going to round it all up very, very nicely. So back to you, Muditambi Ravele. Okay, we're struggling to connect with Muritambi, and we're also running out of time. So yeah, just want to wrap it up to say thank you all so much for being a part of it. We're seeing all of your comments that have come in. Don't forget to keep following the SAWASF on all those platforms. We're on Twitter as well, Facebook, YouTube channels, and we'll continue to post a lot of these videos, a lot of these webinars. If you've missed any of the previous editions as well, they've been very, very informative. It's been an absolute pleasure and an honor to be your host for this great, great webinar. Till the next time, stay safe, and we're looking forward to welcoming more and more of you into the sports media industry. Goodbye.